Alright, so in this video what I'm going to attempt to do is to explain the useState hook in a very easy to understand way so you can actually go ahead and implement it and start using it inside of your React projects. Now I will say that the useState hook is one of the most important, if not the most important hook in React, and if you've never worked with the useState hook, it can be a little bit tricky to wrap your head around at first, but then it's super easy and straightforward. I did struggle a little bit at the beginning, but then once you get a little bit of practice in, it's just very easy to use. All right, so don't be scared of it. Let's go and actually get started. Let me refresh the project. Now, before we start with code and anything, I just want to say that in the description of the video, you will have the link to this resource. Okay, you can download the resource, you can do whatever you want with it. It's basically a description of the useState hook, and then a few things that you need to take into account when it comes to working with the useState hook inside of your projects. Now, I'm going to explain the project that I have got set up. It is a very, very simple React project. I just run npm create vite at latest space dot to create a React vite project inside of my folder that I named useState. And essentially we just got a button, a span, and another button. And as you can see here, this doesn't have any functionality yet. We have not attached any piece of state to the app. And the first thing that we need to do in order to start working with the useState hook is actually import it from React. So we're going to do that. I'm going to import useState from React. And the next thing that we need to do is call the useState hook. Now, what do we actually get from the useState hook? We get an array that holds two things. It holds the actual state that we're trying to manage, and it holds a function that we're going to use to manipulate that state inside of our application. Now, we can destructure these two values out of this array that the useState hook gives us back. And the first one we're just going to call state, and the next one is going to be called set state. Like I said, this is the state, and this is the function that we're going to use to set or manipulate the state. Now, the convention to name this function is to always call it with the keyword set plus the name of your state. So in this case, for example, if we named it count, we have to actually set this function name to be set count. And we're going to get this back from our useState hook. Now, the useState hook, we typically want to initialize it with a specific value. Now, this value can be anything that we want. It can be a string, it can be a boolean, it can be an object, it can be an array, it can even be a function. It can be whatever you want. It can be a number. So in this case, because we're working with numbers, I'm going to initialize my state with the number 0, and I'm going to dynamically insert my piece of state here, and we're going to call count. And as you can see, we've got the exact same result as before. Okay, we still don't have any functionality. We click the buttons, nothing happens at all. Now, let's see if we change the state, or we change the initial state value to 4, we can see that indeed it changed here. So let's go with the next very important thing about useState, which is this setter function. Let's create another function that is going to be called handle decrement. And we're going to create an arrow function here, and we're going to attach an event listener to this button, and we're going to call handle decrement. Now, inside of this handle decrement function, what we're going to do is we're going to decrement the state number by 1. So every time we click on this button, what we want to do is decrement this number by 1. So 3, 2, 1, 0. And especially when we're starting out, we think that we could just simply call the function here and say, all right, so this function allows us to change or mutate the state. And because I want to decrement the state by 1, I'm just going to call my state -1. Now, this will work, but we will encounter some issues. And to illustrate those issues, I'm going to duplicate this line. Now, you may think that in this case, the state number will decrement by 2 because we're calling the setter function here and we're calling it again here. But if we go back to a project and refresh to make it super clear, and we click on this minus button, we're not decrementing by 2, we're decrementing by 1. But why is this? And why does this happen? Essentially, when we are doing this, this function right here is overriding this one. So this count is equal to 4, and 4 minus 1 is 3. But it turns out that this count value is not 3, it's 4 as well. So it gives us the exact same result. And essentially this is overriding this, so we are only decrementing our state by 1. So that is a super important thing that you need to take into account. So how would we actually go ahead and fix it? We could call our setter function, and this setter function gives us a value, a previous value of the state that we normally call pref, followed by the state name, so in this case pref count, and this is essentially, or this setter function will take a callback function, and as an argument inside of that callback function we're going to get the previous state, in this case the previous count. And now we can work with this previous number or previous value of the state and manipulate it. And now we can do previous count by 1. If we do this, everything will work just fine. But if we come here and duplicate this line, now it will actually decrement the state by 2 every single time. And this happens because we are working with the previous value of the state. In this case, we're setting the previous value to be 3 because we're decrementing 4 by 1 equals 3. And then this previous count is going to be 3. We're receiving the previous value of the state. So in this case, 3 minus 1 is going to equal 2, which is exactly what we see here. All right. That is the basics of the useState hook. Now let's go a little bit deeper into it. Let's actually get rid of this for a second. Let's actually get rid of this 4 and let's create a piece of state that is now going to be an object. And we're going to have our count, which is going to be set to 4. And we're going to have a theme, which is going to be light, for example. All right. Even though if you are into programming and into coding, you probably prefer dark mode. I much prefer dark mode, by the way. But anyway, after this very useless detour, let's get back to it. I'm actually going to leave this and I'm going to create another span, and we're going to call the state, actually let's rename this to state, and this will rename to set state. And in here we can call state.theme, and I'm calling state.theme because state is essentially an object, and to access the theme key value pair we actually want to call state.theme. And same with this, we want to call state.count. Great. So if we go back to our app, let me actually comment this out because otherwise it'll probably give us an error. No, actually it'll be fine. So if we go back to our app, we can see that we now got the buttons, and we have got the count, and we have got the theme. Awesome. So let me refresh this and let's go back here. Now, the point that I want to illustrate with this is how do we work with objects inside of a state? So you might be prompted to think that, all right, so if we have our state setting function, in this case set state, and we need to work with previous values, let's call this pref state and create our callback arrow function, and we're actually going to return, okay, our count is going to be our previous state dot count minus 1. All right, so there's nothing wrong here, right? We've got our previous state value and we're setting our count to be our previous state.count minus 1. So everything should work fine. But if we come here, let me refresh to make it absolutely clear what's going on. If we click on the minus, something weird happens. And of course, the number goes down because we're setting it to be count minus 1, or the previous state.count minus 1. But our state for our theme has disappeared. Now, why does this happen? So when we do this in React, or when we're working with state and we're working with objects or arrays, it is super, super important that we don't actually mutate or change our state like this. We always want to make a copy of the old state, and then we want to change or mutate the values as we want. So in this case, we want to create a copy with the spread operator of the previous state, and then if we want to change or mutate the count by 1, we can actually do that. And now when we do this, we can see that the theme is still there, and we can still change and mutate our count without any type of issues. All right. Now this is extremely, extremely important. Every time that you work with arrays or with objects, when you're working with state, you want to actually spread the object and the array out so you don't lose that previous state value. Okay, this is something that React in the documentation makes extremely clear. You don't want to mutate the state directly. You always want to create a copy of the previous state and then mutate any values as you want. All right, so that said, which is extremely important, the one thing that I wanted to end the video with is that, let's say that you have something that is going to take a lot of computational, power from your machine to run, right? Let's say that you've got a huge function, or you've got a super complex program that you want to initialize your state with. I don't know, God knows, I don't even know what to give here as an example, but just something that is going to require a lot of energy from your computer to actually start it up. The thing with the state is that every time we change our state, this component re-renders. So if we have something that is going to take a lot of energy, quote unquote energy, from your PC or your machine to actually execute, we probably don't want to execute it every single time the component renders. So what we can do to avoid that is to essentially pass a callback function. All right, we can pass a function inside of our state. And what this will do is signal to our React app that, hey, this is something that takes up a lot of energy from my machine to actually run, and I just want you to run it once when this component first renders, but then I don't want you to run it anymore. All right, so those are the main pieces of information that you actually require from state. Actually go back, and just to get a little bit more practice, we're going to do the handle increment, and if you want to do this and pause the video right now and then come back and check if you've actually done it right, please feel free to do so. But to actually mutate this piece of state right here, to mutate our count and to be able to increment that count, we're going to say const handle increment is going to be equal to our arrow function, and then we're going to set our state. We're going to get our previous state, and we're going to pass in our return statement, and we're going to spread out our previous state, and we're going to set count to be previous state dot count plus 1. All right, and now if we attach this function to an on-click event here to this button, it should work perfectly fine. So if we go back to our app, let's refresh this to make it super clear that it works. We can decrement and we can increment, and we're encountering no issues whatsoever. There is no errors in the console. So yeah, it is extremely important. Again, I do want to remark that when you work with objects and arrays in React with state, you always want to spread that object or that array out. All right. So anyway, that has been it. I hope that you have actually got some value out of this. If you've got any questions, please do leave them down in the comments. I would love to answer anything that you guys come up with. And if you want to see any other React hooks being explained in a super easy to understand way, please do leave it down below. And yeah, if you liked it, subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.